Happy Triple Header Thursday, everyone. We've got videos coming out on all 3 channels today, so make sure to subscribe now to GG7 to learn more about the history of Major League Baseball. And now, on with our feature presentation. The discipline of players is a subject that you can ask 100 different coaches about what their philosophy is, and you would get 100 different answers. Heck, you can ask 2 coaches at the same exact school what their thoughts are on it, as we've seen with Alabama and Nick Saban for the football team and Nate Oates for the men's basketball team, and you would get 2 wildly different answers. If a player makes a mistake or gets in trouble, should they be suspended? Should you be suspended for violating team rules, or for screwing around in class, or for showing up to practice late? On the more serious side, when it comes to real-world implications, should you be suspended for getting arrested and for breaking the law? And while I don't have all the evidence, I would wager that most coaches would say that yes. If you did something to get yourself arrested and put people's lives at risk, that you should be suspended for that, and you should not be playing. Well, the man that you've been watching this whole time, Oklahoma State head coach Pat Jones, didn't seem to think so. Because in a highly controversial move, prior to a 1992 game between his Cowboys and the Iowa State Cyclones, he decided that winning the game was more important than running a program of integrity and high morals. It's a move that has seemingly been forgotten about more than 3 decades later. But considering some of the recent controversies in college sports, we're going to talk about it today. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the craziest quarterback controversy in the history of the Oklahoma State football team. Before I talk about the game in question that the quarterback started in, we need some context to understand just who this man right here, the quarterback, even was, and how good he was for the program. The year is 1992, and after an abysmal 1991 season, where the Cowboys went 0-10-1 and had the second worst offense in all of college football by averaging just over 9 points per game, Oklahoma State actually looked semi-respectable to start the year off. I don't want to say they look good by any means, seeing as they played 2 ranked opponents in Michigan and Nebraska and lost those games by a combined score of 90-3. But at the very least, they looked better than where they were, as shooting the first 6 games of the season, they sit at 3-3, and might have a shot, if some cards fall their way over the second half of the season, to think about a postseason bowl game. As a side note, to learn more about how Oklahoma State started their 1992 season and the bizarre way that it kicked off, click the card in the upper right corner. And while there were quite a few reasons for the turnaround of sorts from a cellar dweller to a somewhat respectable team again in wake of the sanctions, one of the big reasons was the play of the man that you've been watching, their true freshman quarterback, Gary Porter. That alone should tell you how good he was if he was starting at a big school in a big conference as a true freshman, because that was extremely rare back in the early 90s. However, while Porter was obviously not perfect and made some mistakes, he had his moments that made you think that this kid was going to be the real deal for a long time. In his second ever game, he had to go into the big house and face Michigan, and he wasn't even the slightest bit nervous following a 10-for-17 performance off the bench. As his teammate, running back Raphael Denson, said on Porter, "I think he was calming us down more than we were calming him down." Porter had his moments, was near the top half of the Big 8 conference in just about every major statistical passing category, and even though he was by no means a finished product, looked like he could have been something special at his peak. However, while Porter might have been fine on the field, off the field, that was a completely different story. He definitely had a bit of an attitude and cockiness about him, where he felt like he was better than everyone else and could do anything he wanted to. Offensive coordinator Bill Michael even said as much, saying on Porter, "It's almost to the point sometimes that it may not be so good for him, because he believes he can do most anything." And prior to their game on October 3rd against TCU, which the Cowboys lost 13-11, Porter violated an unspecified team rule and wound up getting suspended for the next game against Nebraska as a result of it. Said head coach Pat Jones on Porter's suspension for violating the rules, which were later confirmed to be curfew-related, "I didn't want an explanation. I didn't want to know the circumstances. They're gone. Case closed." He then added on Porter after the Nebraska game, "We left him home last week because he needed to learn how to act." Message sent for sure. Gary Porter had all the talent in the world, but Pat Jones was putting his foot down and essentially saying, "Don't you dare screw up again." And sure enough, he screwed up again. Although this time, it was way worse. Because this wasn't a violation of Pat Jones' rules, but rather a violation of the rules of the state of Oklahoma. Because even though Porter was on top of the world on the day of October 17th, when in front of his home fans at Stillwater, he beat Missouri 28-26 while throwing for 261 yards and 2 touchdowns, that night, he was at rock bottom. That night, Porter was arrested for drunk driving. That night, when he blew into the breathalyzer, his blood alcohol content was 0.12. In the state of Oklahoma, a person is legally intoxicated once they hit 0.10. Seeing as the data show that Porter roughly weighed 195 pounds, we can deduct that this was about 6 drinks in his system when he got pulled over and whatnot. Porter was also driving with no proof of insurance. Porter got into an accident with a second vehicle near a night spot that was never named, but apparently had a ton of Oklahoma State students frequenting it. Fortunately, the driver of the other vehicle did not die or suffer any major injuries, but Porter was arrested, spent the night in jail, and was given a November court date in Payne County. So you would think that this should be an easy decision for Jones in terms of what to do about his quarterback, right? I mean, you flat out said the kid needs to grow up and needs to mature. You suspended him for breaking team rules earlier. Surely, if you're going to suspend a guy for missing an arbitrary curfew, you're going to suspend him for getting into an accident and for driving while intoxicated, right? Well, not quite. Because, and it seems crazy that it happened like this, but Pat Jones said that despite the arrest, and despite the DUI, and despite the fact that it was his second time getting into some kind of trouble this month, that Gary Porter was going to play this scheme against Iowa State. He said that the playing status of Porter, even in the wake of the incident, was unchanged, and that he would be good to go. And Jones said afterwards, "It was no fun being a dictator this week. I wrestled with a lot of things. But whatever he was wrestling with, it led him in the direction of non-suspending Porter for the homecoming game against Iowa State. Probably since Porter gave Oklahoma State a better chance to win, and the Cowboys needed to win this game if they wanted to keep their bowl hopes alive." Now, for what it's worth, Iowa State head coach Jim Walden had no problem with Pat Jones' decision to play Porter, and was fully expecting Porter to play in this game. As Walden said, "You have to give 10% variance for goofiness in our business. The hardest thing for the public and everybody to understand is that our kids all average around 20 years old, and 20-year-olds are goofy. They do goofy things. They don't think like you do. They just think like 20-year-olds. And when I was 20, I was goofy." Hey, time out for just a second. Can we look at that quote? That statement by Walden is legitimately disgusting and almost infuriating. Yes, kids will be kids, and 20-year-olds will do stuff that other adults won't do. Their brains aren't fully developed. But when I think of that, I don't think of a freaking DUI. I wouldn't classify getting still wasted and then hitting the road and getting involved in an accident and potentially taking someone's life as goofy. Goofy things that 20-year-olds do are things like doing anything, no matter how stupid it might seem, to try and impress a girl. Not getting into a car 6 beers in and putting everyone's life at risk. I mean, come on with that nonsense. To call a DUI a goofy thing is despicable and disgusting. And hey, I was 20 at one point. I don't think at 25 the way I do at 20. There are certain things I thought about at 20 that I look back and say, why did I ever think that? Why did I ever think that was a good idea? But you know what I never thought about doing at 20? Getting plastered and then getting into a car and driving it down the highway. Give me a freaking break. And while Walden was one of the few, like Jones, who believed that Porter should be allowed to play in this game and start under center for the team, despite his DUI not even a full week beforehand, there were many people who did not feel the same way about this at all. Not in the slightest bit. Perhaps none of these contrarian voices were more prominent than Dave Sittler, a writer for the Daily Oklahoman, who absolutely tore into the school and Jones for allowing Porter to play in this game and for putting winning a football game above basic human decency and morality. Among the things that Sittler wrote included that Oklahoma State lost its image and credibility, that this plan to start Porter was a sad, wrong, and desperate plan, and that everything about this entire situation highlighted and encapsulated the sorry state of college sports at this moment in 1992. Echoing those thoughts was another writer for the newspaper, John Rode, who called the decision not to suspend Porter dubious, and criticized Jones for saying that there was no right or wrong way to manage this situation. Somehow, for a program that wasn't too far removed from a ton of sanctions that basically stripped the program back down to square one, this was the biggest embarrassment and black eye of them all. And perhaps the most infuriating part for a ton of people about this is the fact that if we're just judging this from a wins and losses perspective, the decision to not bench Gary Porter, as you can tell from these highlights of the game, absolutely worked. Because when the final whistle sounded, Oklahoma State emerged victorious, and in front of their home crowd of 31,880 fans, defeated the Cyclones by a final score of 27-21. Porter looked the part too, throwing for 161 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions, and finished the game with an NFL passer rating of just over 100, which is not too shabby if I do say so myself. Porter turned out to be a big reason why the Cowboys won this game. If they had to put any other quarterback back there, Oklahoma State probably loses this game. Pat Jones' decision to play Gary Porter and not suspend him won the Cowboys the game and helped keep their season alive to some extent. But that didn't matter. None of that mattered. Because in the eyes of many, even though Oklahoma State won on the scoreboard, just the fact that Porter was allowed to play in this game made Oklahoma State the true loser of the day, because they sacrificed integrity and morality for an attempt to win a football game. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.